With Emma and Grace, my two older sisters, I have always had a difficult connection. Although we have never been really close, they are 8 and 10 years older than me, respectively, and until recently, we have never been absolutely unfriendly. My wife, Kate, and I are childless. This lifestyle appears to confuse Dan and Rob, the husbands of my sisters. Emma and Grace are stay-at-home mothers with children ranging in age from 7 to 11 years old. Their husbands, while making good money, seem always jealous of the lifestyle Kate and I have created. I was therefore not happy about having to go last weekend when my parents, Evelyn and Thomas, decided to have a barbecue. These family get-togethers felt like a minefield, with my sister's sarcastic comments about how lucky we are, or how don't understand real responsibility. I turned down the invitation first, but my mom guilt-tripped Kate into showing up. We grudgingly agreed, since Kate is the kind of person who constantly seeks the positive in people. The scene was anarchy when we got there. While my dad, always the strategist, had disappeared to the whirlpool portion of the pool with a little cooler of beer, my mom was furiously trying to keep my nieces and nephews under control. Mostly neighbors and family friends, there were approximately 20 persons there. Emma and Grace's husbands were well past buzzing. Emma and Grace were already a few beers in. Trying to keep our distance from the turmoil, Kate and I picked some food, struck up a small chat, and settled in with iced margaritas. Emma and Grace got in on us right away for being late and not wearing swimsuits, stating we were screwing up the vibe. We dismissed it as ordinary suburban garbage. About 45 minutes in, the first indication that things were turning south came. Two of the youngsters thought it would be funny to shove Linda, a middle-aged neighbor guest, into the pool. She stammered at the steps and barely got half wet, but it was sufficient to clearly irritate her. She just dried off and left silently. She did not cause a scene. Emma and Grace, on the other hand, thought it hysterical and laughed and encouraged their children. Not long after, 3 of the children were racing toward me out of the corner of my eye. Realizing I was their next target did not require intellect. I sidestepped at last second instead of allowing them to push me into the pool. The outcome is all 3 of them shot directly into the lake. Most of the visitors, including Kate and me, first laughed. It was such a predictable result. But Emma and Grace, who were by now utterly perfect, floundered. 2 of the children, supposedly in swimwear, claimed not to be able to swim. Knowing I wasn't in swim gear and not wanting to compromise my own safety, I backed off rather than diving in to assist. Although other people hurriedly pulled the children out, damage was done. Chaos broke out as the children screamed like they had been mortally injured. My sisters and their husbands started yelling at everyone generally and at me specifically. They blamed me for almost letting their kids drown and damaging 2 iPhones buried at the pool's bottom. Rob, one of the husbands, jumped in to grab the phones but was too inebriated and out of shape to control. Emma and Grace kept berating everyone, and the rest of us stood there nervously, avoiding eye contact. I've had enough. Emma and Grace were supposed to be watching their children, so if anything had happened, it would have been their responsibility, not mine. Strong language used on both sides of this set off an even more heated debate. When Rob tried to yell at us in a drunken fit of wrath, Kate and I decided to leave, but she tripped, and face-planting into the patio resulted. Emma yelled that I should have let their children push me in the water and have some fun as we strolled to the car. Apparently, damaging my phone and wetting my clothes would have been worth it to them. Ever the optimist, Kate said on the drive home that she too had reached her limit with my family. Maybe next time we won't feel so guilty about skipping these things, she remarked. I could agree more than anything else. That evening I thought back on the assembly. I came to see that the children's behavior directly reflected their parents' lack of discipline and responsibility, even when they were just being children. It was Emma, Grace, and their husbands whose pettiness and entitlement made every contact with them taxing, not the children I hated. This was not the first time they had behaved in this manner. It would not be the last. I had no idea, though, that this was simply the start of a far more major tempest. Funny how you can always feel when something isn't completely finished. I felt that nervous knot in my stomach as Kate and I headed home from the cookout. Although the cookout had been disappointing, The aftermath would be far worse. Emma and Grace could already be seen bending the narrative into some ridiculous form whereby I was the villain. They really do function this way. The first shoe fell next morning. Texts from my mom, Evelyn, who seemed more disoriented than normal, woke me. My sisters apparently vented in the family group chat late night, accusing me of traumatizing their children and ruining their phones. Though Kate and I hardly participate in the chat, mostly Emma and Grace trade Pinterest ideas and share images of their children. I checked it out this time. The messages made sense only in reverse. Emma: I find it hard that James wouldn't simply let the youngsters push him in the pool while cracking jokes. He is really strict, and today he is the reason their phones are wrecked. Grace said, We just wanted the kids to have fun, but James always has to ruin everything. And where else was Kate? She could have assisted rather than only laughed. Emma said, Right? They lack children, hence I swear they believe they are superior than us. It astounded me. Actually, they were blaming me for their drunken parenting and for their children's phones ending at the bottom of the pool. Before slamming my phone down on the counter, I leafed through a few more messages. Though not shocked, I was enraged. Kate came in carrying coffee and cast a knowing glance at me. Family conference? She inquiries. Sure, I said. They are already whirling the narrative, Kate said. You know, I understand they're offended, but the kids don't irritate me. They are enraged since they must assign someone responsibility. She was correct, naturally. Emma and Grace had always been masters at dodging responsibility. Should something go wrong, it was always someone else's. They never owned it. A few hours later, my mother called, delivering the next blow. She seemed tense, as though she was attempting to choose her words precisely. James, I have to talk to you about yesterday. I drew in a long breath. All right, Mom. What else comes to mind? She hesitated, then said, Your sisters are terribly unhappy. She responded, Wait, apologize? For what? For not letting them throw me in? It's not just that either. It's the phones, too. Those were expensive. I could not believe what I was hearing. Mom, the parents are these ones. Their job is to monitor their children, not mine. Mom, I apologize for not doing something. Emma and Grace must own their once neglect. Should they not, this kind of behavior will simply continue. On the other side of the line, there was extended quiet. She answered at last, I understand. I simply wish things were not so strained among all of you. So do I answered really. I won, however, be their punching bag. That evening, I made the temporary decision to block Emma and Grace. I sought some distance from their turmoil. They're not going to stop until they find someone else to blame, Kate said. You could as well exclude yourself from the equation. If you're angry, that's okay, but I'm not apologizing for anything that wasn't my fault. Emma laughed bitterly. Not your fault? Are you truly serious? You neglected to even assist our children when you let them drop into the pool, I shot back. They were trying to push me in, and plenty of other adults around got them out quite nicely. Grace entered the picture. About the phones, what about them? Those cost James quite a lot. At least you could offer to assist replace them. There was no use. Kate was waiting for me with a teacup when I returned indoors. You fine? She inquired. Not exactly, I said, seated down hard. I'm done even though I'm not sure what their issue is. This time I am permanently blocking them. Kate nodded. Good. Your life does not call for this sort of negativity. She was correct, of course. Deep down, though, I knew this was not ending. Given their sense of slighting, Emma and Grace were not the kind of people to let things go. Indeed, the next part of this story was already under development and would have been even more ugly. Blocking my sisters meant to establish harmony. It did for a few days as well. Kate and I tried to put the drama behind us while going about our daily lives and savored the peace. But I knew it was only a matter of time until things grew worse, much as you might see a terrible storm building on approach. The first indication of problems arrived in a phone call from my dad, Thomas. He is more of a let your mother handle it kind of person. He hardly calls unless something is truly important, but that day his voice had an edge I was not used to hearing. James said without preamble, We need to talk. Okay, what's up? Already starting to brace myself, I asked. Your sisters have been phoning incessantly, he replied with a sigh. Frustrated, I said, You cut them off and you're not helping with the phones. I blocked them since they would not leave me alone. I did not cut them off. I am not also replacing their phones. Why should I also? I understand. You know how mom is when the family is not getting along. These are the ones that let their kids run wild with $1,000 devices. I groaned. Though she had a tendency to make everything her problem, I loved my mother, Evelyn. She would tie herself in knots trying to smooth things over, even if it meant guilt-tripping me into backing down. I'm not apologizing, and I'm not paying for those phones. It didn't matter Emma and Grace were generating the drama. They have to own their conduct, Dad said. You would say that, just try not to complicate matters for your mother, okay? I ignored it. Not much else had to be said. The storm broke a few days later. Just after supper, Kate and I heard another knock at the door. This time, Emma and Grace were not alone. Their husbands, Dan and Rob, also were involved. Standing on the porch, all four of them seemed enraged and resolved. Keeping my foot firmly against the door, I opened it just a crack. Your desired is what? My voice firm but chilly, I questioned. Usually the more subdued of the two, Dan spoke first. We're here to talk about the mountain house. I should have known this was coming. Quick backstory. A few years ago, Kate and I bought a vacation home in the mountains. It was something my parents had always dreamed of but could never afford, so we made it happen for them. Technically, the house was in my name, but my parents had full control over it. They used it regularly and occasionally let Emma and Grace's families stay there. Kate and I didn't mind, as long as everyone respected the property. But now, with tensions running high, the house had become a sore point. Emma and Grace had always assumed it was my parents' house, and they'd grown used to treating it like their personal retreat. I'd never corrected them about who owned it. It just wasn't worth the drama. Until now, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, blocking their view of Kate. What about the mountain house? I asked, crossing my arms. Grace, who looked ready to explode, cut in. We need access to it. You can't just block us out. Block you out? I repeated, incredulous. You've never had access. Mom and Dad decide who uses it. Emma rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, James. We all know you're the one who really owns it. You're just being petty because of what happened at the barbecue. My patience was wearing thin. I'm not being petty. I just don't think you should have free reign over something that's not yours. And given how you've treated me lately, I'm not exactly eager to do you any favors. Dan stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker. Look, we've all made mistakes, okay? But the kids love that place, and we've got plans for the summer. Just let us use it like we always have. I shook my head. That's not with me. That's up to Mom and Dad. Rob went crazy at that point. You know that you are a selfish bastard? You won't let anyone use this fantastic house you have just sitting there. Do you not even give your family any thought? That's rich, coming from the man who let his kids trash my parents' pool party, I said. After then, things started to slide quickly. There was yelling, accusing, lots of finger-pointing. I stood my ground without moving. I finally had enough. This is over, I stated with great conviction. Take the house up with Mom and Dad if you choose to use it. Get off my land right now. Rob seemed poised to protest, but Dan rested a hand on his shoulder. Let's go, he said softly. It's about the mountain house, she added. I erupted. They have been making money off of my house without my knowledge. How is that not really significant? I know, she answered rapidly. And I am furious as well as your dad. They already know they are not permitted to occupy the residence going forward. That is insufficient, I answered, my voice icy. I'm altering the locks. They have done. I drove up to the mountain residence that evening carrying a heavy-duty chain and lock for the front gate. I replaced the codes on the door keypads and set up a fresh camera-equipped security system. It was almost late when I finished and I was tired, but I felt relief. I thought I had control for the first time in weeks. Kate was waiting for me when I arrived home. Did you finish it? She inquired. Yes, I said, curling up on the couch. She nodded, but I could see the concern in her eyes. They are kept out permanently. You are aware that this is not the end? Looking at the floor, I answered, I know. Though locking the mountain house was meant to be the last word, as always with my sisters, things weren't that straightforward. It seemed as though the storm may really pass for 1 week or two. Kate and I resumed our schedule, and I began to hope, just maybe, Emma and Grace would leave it go. That was idealized thinking. My dad, Thomas, was first involved. James continued, feeling annoyed and worn out. We have another problem. He contacted me one evening. Right now? Already afraid of the response, I inquired. Emma is it, he said with a sigh. She informed your mother she was having financial difficulties. Their credit cards are maxed out, and they lag on their auto payments. I felt my jaw clench as she explained they were depending on using the mountain cottage to generate some additional income. You're fooling me. She acknowledged renting it out, and now she wants me to feel bad about cutting her off? He said carefully. She didn't say that exactly, but it's really obvious where this is leading. The kids worry your mother about. I grumbled. Dad, this isn't my problem. I didn't tell Emma to live beyond her means, and I sure as hell didn't tell her to use my property to run some shady side business. I know she's scared they might lose their house if things get worse. Still, you know how your mother gets. She wants the children to not suffer because of the mistakes of their parents. And then regarding me, I back off. Am I supposed to let them to walk all over me? Dad went quiet for a brief period. No, you're not, he then said. Still, you have to be ready. Emma and Grace are already discussing going to see you for guidance. That forecast came true not long after. A few days later, Emma and Grace returned to my place once more, this time without their spouses. Kate was not at home, most likely for good reason. Any more than she already was, I wanted her pulled into their stupidity. I kept my expression calm as I opened the door a little slowly. What are your desires? I asked, said Emma, wasted no time at all. We have to discuss the mountain house. No, we do not, I answered sharply. I have already decided on this. You're acting illogically, she said. We have always used that residence. Now you are simply cutting off us due to some dumb dispute? It's not just an argument, I responded, my voice rising. You were leasing my property without my consent. How severe that is, do you know? Grace tried to step in, her voice lower. James, we meant no damage here. Our only concern was attempting to make ends fit. You don't know what it's like to struggle like we do. I laughed bitterly. You're right, I don't. Because I don't live beyond my means. And I sure as hell don't steal from my family to fix my mistakes. The conversation spiraled from there. Emma accused me of being selfish, of not caring about family values, and of prioritizing my lifestyle over their struggles. Grace backed her up, throwing in a few passive-aggressive jabs about how Kate and I had too much and didn't know how to share. I'd had enough. This conversation is over, I said, stepping back inside. You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Don't come here again. Before I could close the door, Emma shouted, You're going to regret this, James. I didn't respond. Slamming the door shut felt like the only power I had left in that moment. That night, I told Kate what had happened. She listened quietly, her expression growing more serious with every word. They're not going to stop, are they? She asked. Probably not, I admitted, but I'm done letting them push me around. If they come back, I'm calling the cops. Kate nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I just don't want this to spiral out of control. Too late for that, I said with a grim smile. But I'll handle it. Things came to a head about a week later. My property manager, David, called me with news I wasn't expecting. Hey, James, he said, his tone cautious. I've been going through some old records for the mountain house. I think you're going to want to see this. What is it? I asked, already bracing myself. Let's just say your sisters were busier than you thought, he replied. I'll email you the details. When the email came through, my jaw dropped. David had discovered several internet postings for the mountain house, complete with stellar ratings and rental fees ranging from $2,000 for a weekend to $4,000 for a whole week. Emma and Grace had been pocketing hundreds of dollars without my knowing for at least 2 years, running a full-scale rental business. I sent the email to Kate, who called me practically right away. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Still, they have gone beyond what is reasonable. This is theft, not only family turmoil now." That evening, I laid everything out for my folks over a call. While my dad was shocked, my mom, he raged. "They have been renting out the house." With trembling in his voice, he said, "This astounds me." "You know," I said, "and I stopped allowing them to get away with it." As usual, my mom tried to intervene. "James, I know you're unhappy, but perhaps we could find something else. The girls meant no harm, that is, no injury," I said, stopping. "Mom, they have been pilfering from me for years. This is not some innocuous error here. It is scam." My dad supported me backwards. "Evelyn, he is right. This is vital. They have gone beyond what is reasonable." My mother answered nothing for once. I changed the locks once more the next day, added fresh security cameras, and changed the gate code. I also chose to formally complain to the sheriff's office. Though I had no idea what would come of it, I had to defend my property and myself. Although I could see how much the circumstances were weighing on her, Kate helped me every stage of the way. One night while we curled on the couch, she remarked, "I just want this to be over. I detest seeing you like way," I said softly as well. "But I don't think it's going to end anytime soon." I was right. The next escalation was just around the corner, and it would be worse than anything I'd imagined. I knew Emma and Grace wouldn't go quietly, but I wasn't prepared for how far they'd go to fight back. After discovering they had turned my mountain house into their personal moneymaker for years, I thought the worst of their entitlement had already been exposed. But, as I was about to find out, my sisters weren't done proving me wrong. The storm hit just before Thanksgiving. Kate and I had already decided we wouldn't be attending any family gatherings this year. After everything that had happened, I wasn't in the mood to play nice. My parents, Thomas and Evelyn, seemed to understand, though I could tell it bothered my mom. She hated the idea of her family being divided, but even she had to admit there wasn't much she could do to fix it. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I got a call from David, the property manager I'd hired to keep an eye on the mountain house. James, "We've got a problem," he said. My stomach sank. "What kind of problem?" "There's been some activity at the house," he said. "The gate was cut open and someone's tried to force their way in." "What?" I exclaimed, the words catching in my throat. "Who?" "I'm not sure yet," he said. "The cameras caught some footage, but I haven't had a chance to review it all. You might want to come up here and take a look." Kate and I drove up that same day. As we pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. The heavy-duty chain I'd installed on the gate had been cut clean through, leaving the lock dangling uselessly. The gate itself was bent out of shape, as if someone had rammed it with a car. When we got closer to the house, the damage only got worse. The front door was a mess. The lock had been smashed, and the frame was splintered. It looked like someone had used a crowbar to pry it open. Inside, things were even worse. Furniture had been moved, drawers were open, and items were strewn across the floor. It wasn't ransacked exactly, but it was clear someone had been there, and they hadn't been careful. David met us there and walked us through what he knew. "The footage shows 2 men coming up the driveway late last night," he said. "They were carrying tools and had some kind of bag with them. I've already handed it over to the sheriff's department." "Did they take anything?" I asked, glancing around at the mess. "Doesn't look like it," he replied. "But they definitely weren't here just to sightsee. By the time we left, I was furious. Kate tried to calm me down, but I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. The damage, the intrusion, it was too much. That night I called the sheriff's department and told them I wanted to press charges against whoever had broken in, no matter who it turned out to be. The next morning, I got my answer. The sheriff called me directly to confirm what I'd already suspected. "It was your brother-in-law," he said. "Dan and Rob." I felt my blood boil. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said. "We previously brought them in for interrogation. The camera footage is evident." "Drop the charges. Are you sincere?" "She worries about the children," he replied softly. "She wants them not to lose their fathers. And regarding me as well?" I seized. "Regarding my residence, what about it? That is not important." It does, he remarked. Still, you know how your mother is. Her only wants are for everyone to get along. Well, that's not happening, I responded firmly. Dad, they went over the line. I am not letting this go. Over the next several days, the fallout was strong. Emma and Grace phoned me several times, alternately threatening and begging. They were begging me to change for the benefit of family 1 minute. Next, they were accusing me of being nasty and vindictive. Although I never answered their calls, their messages were unrelenting. Always the voice of reason, Kate worked to ground me. One evening she said, "They're desperate. They are trying to correct knowing they have botched something. Indeed, it's too late for that," I said. But even as I spoke it, its weight eluded me. I was tired, and the circumstances had gone so far beyond anything I could have envisioned. There was never a winning whatever I did. Should I charge, I would be the villain from the perspective of my family. Ignoring it would allow even more contempt and entitlement to pass through. By the end of the week, I had decided. Not unless Dan and Rob compensated for all the damages they had caused. I informed the sheriff's department when I phoned them I would not drop the charges. It was about defining limits rather than about the money. They had to realize that their acts had results. I called their attorney that same day, offering to pay a small portion of the expenses in return for completely dropping the accusations. He tried to negotiate. I turned back. "Full pay or the charges remain," I said. "My sole offer is that one." Over the next few days, I had an unusual mixture of remorse and relief, especially with my mom phoning every other day to beg me to be the bigger person. Standing in my position wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't back off. Not this time either. Kate supported me consistently while I went through it all. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she murmured, "You're doing the right thing. They need to learn that they can't just walk all over you." I nodded, though deep down I wasn't sure if I believed her. The weight of it all was crushing, and I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever really be free of the drama. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let my sisters or their husbands control my life anymore. This was my breaking point, and I was done playing their games. It's strange how family can feel like a rope around your neck, something meant to support you but tightening when you try to breathe freely. That's how it felt with Emma, Grace, and their husbands. Every time I thought I'd set a boundary, they pushed harder, trying to claw back control. After the break-in at the Mountain House, I had reached my limit. There was no coming back from this. The fallout started almost immediately after I refused to drop the charges. The sheriff's department processed Dan and Rob for breaking and entering, destruction of property, and trespassing. The charges were serious, and while I wasn't looking to ruin their lives, I wasn't about to let them off the hook either, not after everything they'd done. Emma and Grace exploded. Their messages and calls intensified, turning from frantic pleas to outright threats. I blocked them everywhere, but they started using new numbers. When that didn't work, they began leaving voicemails for Kate. "Do you really want to tear this family apart over a misunderstanding?" One message from Emma said, "I thought you were better than this, Kate. Another from Grace was even worse. "Tell James he's going to regret this. Family doesn't turn their backs like this. Kate played the messages for me, her face pale but resolute. "They're unhinged," she said. "You need to protect yourself." "I already have," I replied, though even as I said it, I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. Protecting myself meant intensifying this struggle. The uglier it grew, the deeper it went. Neither were my parents immune to the turmoil. Emma and Grace accused them of supporting me and not acting to resolve the matter, so turning their resentment toward them. "James," my mother said, "I don't know what to do," her voice quivering as she tried to make sense of it all one night. "Your sisters are mad. They believe we are sideline supporters. Are you as well?" I questioned directly. She stumbled. "Our only goal is for the family to get along. Neither your dad nor I want anyone to wind up in prison. Then perhaps you should chat with Emma and Grace. Because I left their house unbroken. I did not pilfer from them. They did this to themselves." "I know," she said softly. "But they're your sisters. Isn't there some way to work this out?" "No, Mom," I said firmly. "Not this time. Things came to a head the following week. The sheriff's department called to let me know that Dan and Rob's lawyer were trying to negotiate a deal. They offered to pay for the damages in full if I agreed to drop the charges. It was a tempting offer, not because I wanted the money, but because I was exhausted. The thought of dragging this out any longer was almost too much to bear. But there was a catch. The lawyer wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, effectively silencing me about the entire situation. It felt like a slap in the face. After everything they'd done, they wanted to sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happened. I called Kate to talk it over. She listened patiently as I vented, her expression thoughtful but guarded. "Do you think it's worth it?" she asked, letting them off the hook for the sake of peace. "It's not peace," I said bitterly. "It's silence. They don't want to fix this. They just want to save face." "Then don't do it," she said simply. "If it doesn't feel right, don't let them bully you into it." Her words stuck with me. That night, I called the lawyer and refused the deal. "I'm willing to drop the charges if they pay for the damages," I said. "But I won't sign an NDA. This isn't something they get to bury." The decision sent shockwaves through the family. Emma and Grace called my parents, screaming about how I was destroying their lives. My mom tried to mediate, but even she couldn't keep up with their relentless accusations. My dad, who had been quietly supportive throughout this ordeal, finally lost his temper. I quote, "I'm done with this," he told me over the phone. "Your mom and I tried to be neutral, but they've gone too far. They need to learn there are consequences." It was a small comfort to know my dad was in my corner, but it didn't make the situation any easier. The more I stood my ground, the more isolated I felt. Family gatherings were canceled, group chats dissolved, and the rift between us grew wider with every passing day. A week later, I got a call from David, my property manager. He'd finished assessing the damage at the mountain house and sent me an itemized report. The total repair costs came to just over $5,000, a hefty price tag, but manageable. "I also added some extra security measures," David said. "I installed another camera at the rear entry, strengthened the locks, and put up fresh signs. Thank you, David. Nobody is entering without you knowing about it. I really am glad. Without you, I do not know what I would do." "No issue," he said. "Just let me know whether you require anything else." Knowing the damages covered, I felt things may at last start to calm down. Of course, though I was mistaken. One line said, "You have destroyed this family." Emma and Grace sent a long, meandering diatribe alternately between blaming me for the fallout and begging me to forgive them. Another read, "We're sorry for renting the house, but you didn't have to take it this far. We were meant to stick together. We've already lost so much. Please don't take anything else away from us." I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. The audacity, the entitlement, the sheer lack of accountability, it was staggering. They didn't see the damage they'd caused, not just to me, but to the entire family. All they cared about was what they'd lost. I showed the letter to Kate, who read it silently before handing it back. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "They've made their bed. Now they can lie in it." Kate nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "Good. You've done enough, James. It's time to move on." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The storm wasn't over, but I was starting to see a path forward. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean, but it was mine, and I was determined to follow it, no matter what came next. The days following Emma and Grace's letter were quieter than I expected. It felt strange, like the eye of a hurricane had settled over my life. For weeks, their calls, messages, and desperate attempts to guilt me had been relentless. Now, suddenly, there was silence. I didn't know if they'd finally given up or if they were regrouping for another strike. Either way, I wasn't about to let my guard down. Thanksgiving came and went without incident. Kate and I spent the holiday with her parents, enjoying the kind of relaxed, drama-free atmosphere I hadn't realized I was missing. It was a reminder of what family could be when people respected boundaries and genuinely cared for one another. It was also a stark contrast to the chaos my own family had descended into. I spoke to my parents briefly that day. My dad seemed resigned to the situation, while my mom was still holding out hope for reconciliation. She mentioned that Emma and Grace had decided to host Thanksgiving separately with their own families, no doubt a result of the tension between them. The irony wasn't lost on me. For all their accusations that I was tearing the family apart, it seemed they were doing a fine job of it themselves. The next major development came in early December. I received a formal notice from Dan and Rob's lawyer confirming that they had agreed to pay for the damages to the mountain house in full. The payment came with no strings attached, no NDAs, no conditions, just a check to cover the costs. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Kate and I decided to take a trip up to the house that weekend to inspect the repairs and make sure everything was back in order. David met us there, as always, armed with his clipboard and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. "Everything's good to go," he said, gesturing to the newly repaired gate and front door. "The cameras are working, the locks are secure, and the property is in better shape than it's been in years." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The house seemed really mine once more, free from the shadow of my sister's entitlement, for the first time since this drama started. I kept thinking about all that had brought us to this point as we moved around the house. Years of subdued jabs, little slights, and unsaid bitterness. The BBQ had collapsed into anarchy. The break-in had destroyed any last hope for trust. Though it was a lot to digest, I sensed peace, something I hadn't felt in weeks, standing there in the silence of the mountains. Kate probably sensed it as well. She grinned and dropped her hand into mine. "This is all about," she remarked gently, "guarding what is rightfully ours." Yes, I nodded. It's well worth it. I realized, nevertheless, that there remained unresolved business even as things appeared on the surface. My connection with my parents was tense. While my dad seemed to get my point of view, my mom was trying to balance her allegiance to me with her want to keep the family intact. The next weekend, I made plans to visit them in order to clear the air. My mom gave me a hesitant smile when I got to their place. She said, "I'm glad you came," which sent me into the living room. Already there, my dad was drinking coffee and leafing through the newspaper. He nodded as he looked up. We took our seats, and for a minute, only stillness. Then my mother started talking. "James," she started, "I know things have been tough recently. It bothers me to see our family this way, so do I." I answered, "Really, but Mom, this was not my pick. Emma and Grace put us here." "I know," she said, her voice wavering, "but they're still your sisters. Is there no way to move past this?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I've thought about that a lot, and the truth is, I don't think we can. Not right now. They've shown me who they are, and I can't ignore that. I need to protect myself and my family." My dad spoke up then, his tone measured but firm. "Evelyn, you know he's right. The girls crossed a line, and it's not James's job to fix it. They need to take responsibility for what they've done." My mom looked between us, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just want things to go back to the way they were." "They can't," I said gently. "But that doesn't mean we can't find a new normal. I love you and Dad, and I want to stay connected with you. But Emma and Grace, I can't let them back into my life." She nodded reluctantly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't like it, but I understand." That conversation marked a turning point. While my relationship with my sisters remained non-existent, my bond with my parents began to heal. We started seeing each other more often, though we made an unspoken agreement not to bring up Emma or Grace. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for my sisters, they continued to reach out occasionally, though their messages grew less frequent over time. I didn't respond, and neither did Kate. Eventually, the calls and texts stopped altogether. Whether they'd finally accepted my boundaries or simply moved on to other targets, I didn't know, and I didn't care. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Kate and I focused on our careers, our hobbies, and our relationship, savoring the peace we'd fought so hard to reclaim. The mountain house became a refuge for us, a place to escape the noise of the world and reconnect with what mattered most. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sun dip below the horizon, Kate turned to me and smiled. "You did the right thing," she said. "It wasn't easy, but you stood up for yourself. That's what matters." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my bones. "Indeed," I answered, "it paid off." And I believed it for the first time in what seemed like eternity.